All right, well, hello, church, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to watch and listen. We're filming this on Tuesday, May the 26th. I say that because, as we have learned repeatedly during these days, things are fluid. James 4:15 says, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. And so what we're about to do and talk about is really kind of a big heaping helping of if the Lord wills. We've spent a lot of the last month and a half, as you know, thinking through kind of the logistics and the challenges that are associated with meeting together again as a church, of regathering, and even reopening. We really use that word intentionally. We've not stopped, obviously, being a church the last 2 months, but we have stopped assembling together. And even though a church is more than a gathering, we would just remind ourselves that it's not less than that. And so it involves gathering. The very word, ecclesia, it means the gathering, which suggests that a church that never really gathers is hardly a church. And so we felt that for sure during this time. And so gathering is essential. That's why we're excited to have this conversation. And we know it's going to be difficult. There are going to be challenges. There are going to be really confusing times. It's going to be laborious. It's going to be hard. But even Elizabeth reminded me of that just the other day, that even that should make us grateful, that we have something that we miss so much, that we would work so hard to try to regather again. And so what we'll do is we'll kind of start with some basics. So obviously Ryan and Nick are joining me here, and we're going to walk through kind of a number of questions that we hope will be helpful to you as a member of Christ Fellowship Church. We know there are other people who just attend, and so hopefully that's helpful to you as well. So this will be available on the website and so forth. So we are planning to reopen, Lord willing, on June the 7th at regular time, 10:30 a.m. And I say plan because that's really the key word. These are plans. These are not promises. So as we make plans, we have precautions. We realize that this is all contingent on circumstances as we know them right now. And so, as the elders have talked about, we want to be responsive to what's happening. And so, we're obviously keeping an eye on not only our own congregation, but what's happening in our city. And so we will be very careful to pay attention to that and to respond to those. And so we would ask you just to continue to pray, as well as to be patient. And we appreciate even just the grace that I know that our church, our congregation has extended during this. You guys have been incredible. And so we're thankful for that, and just the kindness and the support that you've already shown. And so we obviously are deeply appreciative of that. So I indicated in that reopening document, so you should have got that. Obviously, it's in your email if you haven't had a chance to read that. But we are planning, one of the things that we're doing, so we're planning to meet on June the 7th, but we are planning to have some people here on this Sunday. And so we're talking about elders and their wives and families, growth group leaders, their wives and families, and then the reopening team, about 20 brothers and sisters. Some of that overlaps. So we're thinking about having around 50 people here or so, with families as well, on Sunday. And the reason we're doing that is one of the things that we read repeatedly in documents as we were thinking about reopening the church is you need to test your plan. And so we think it's wise, we think it's best to do that. So we're not obviously inviting the whole church, because we just don't want 100 moving parts on the first Sunday that we are gathering together, trying to figure that out. We don't think that would be wise. We already see challenges just for this coming week. And so we've invited a number of people that will help us to think through. They'll give us feedback on that. But then on June 7th, we would invite, obviously, the whole church, whoever can come on that particular day. Just as to reiterate, you'll see this on signage. I know Nick is kind of working on some of this. We obviously want to reiterate that if you are symptomatic in any way, and so coughing, sneezing, fever, aching, any flu-like symptoms, if that's you, obviously we would beg you to stay home. And so we love the impulse wanting to come to church, unless providentially hindered. We would consider that providentially hindered. And so out of love to neighbor, love for the church, we would ask you, if you're symptomatic in any way, please stay home. And so we'll just continue to reiterate that on signage, on screens, all those kind of things. But we would ask you to just help us in that. So anybody in your family, we would encourage you to not attend, get well, and then reconsider. attending. So enough of me for the moment. So what we'll do is I have a number of questions. Nick and Ryan are going to help me through. And so Ryan, we'll start with you, if it's all right. So we suspect, know really, that there are a number in our church who cannot attend or who will not attend. So maybe that means you're immunocompromised in some way, or you're around somebody who is. Maybe you have a parent or grandparent that you're frequently around, something like that. Maybe you're hesitant, whatever the reason is. How would you speak to those brothers and sisters about kind of the combination of a command to gather, Hebrews 10, 24 and 25, so do not forsake the assembling together of yourselves together, especially as the day of the Lord approaches. So I know I need to do this for my own sanctification, my own growth in Christ, my own keeping on following after Christ, but I'm hesitant. And so how would you speak in terms of conscience on that? And then how do we want to, as a church, come alongside, thinking live stream, how do we kind of help in that?
Sure. So thinking about brothers and sisters who may be thinking that they want to be here but can't for some reason, and as Bart said, whatever that reason is, whether it is the difficulty of children and loving your family well, the difficulty of having some sort of disease or something that makes your immune system compromised, we would not consider you choosing to stay at home for this season as sin or as disobedience. As Bart mentioned, Hebrews 10, like the warning that is given there is to a group of people who have decided that it is no longer necessary for them to meet, period, and whose hearts really have grown cold towards the assembling of the saints. We think this is really important, and we assume that many of you think that as well, but we would not want you to be burdened by thinking that you are disobeying God's command by staying home. So we'd encourage you, if that's something that's weighing on you, feel free to talk to a pastor, to an elder, to your growth group leader, and talk through those things. But we don't want you to hear we're opening, and if we don't see you in the next 3 weeks, that there's a problem. We think it's wise, and even love of your neighbor, love yourself, love your family, love your neighbor, potentially for some and maybe many of you to stay home. In terms of what we're doing for people who are choosing to stay home, we are going to continue the live stream. We've invested in some different equipment that hopefully will help us to continue to do that at a level that's good and that makes it easy for you to watch. We are, in terms of kids, there'll be more videos coming out as well. But if you're a family and you think that right now it's best for me to stay home with my kids, we are going to be providing. We're still going to be doing the CFC Kids teaching videos. We're putting together some activity bags that we'll be handing around to families, hopefully here in the next week or two, to if you do decide to come back to church, so it would have some things that will help your kids here, but also just some things you can use at home while you're watching the live stream and your kids are trying to listen. So we do want to care for you as you may need to stay home for a while as well.
Excellent. All right, so we do want to think about what it looks like for you to come potentially on June the 7th. And so Nick, we kind of divided up when we had this reopening team, divided up into sub-teams. And so Nick helped lead just kind of hospitality, social distancing, what does that look like? And so he's been thinking a lot about kind of best practices, what can we do to mitigate risk as we come in, as we exit, and then also during the service. And so Nick, maybe walk us through some of those things. We'll bracket out, I guess, the worship changes, so that'll be kind of the second question. So, but just sort of entering, worship, and exit.
Yeah, so as you approach the building, you'll see a lot of signage that's going to be telling you a lot of the same things we've been communicating. Don't come if you're sick. And then as you approach the building, you'll see some markings on the ground that we'll try to do what we can to keep social distancing, so 6 feet apart as you approach with your family or by yourself or whoever you come with. And so we'll just ask you to kind of proceed along those markings. That'll be on the ground in the plaza as well as in the commons, which is that area where the coffee is, the bookstall is. There won't be any coffee or bookstall. But as you approach, you'll see ushers and greeters helping you know where to go. And then you'll kind of just follow those markings on the ground. So just proceed as efficiently as we can, just listening to those who are helping you find seats. Once you come into the room, you'll see that seats are spaced out 6 feet apart in groupings of 1, 2, 4, and 5. So that's all spread out throughout the room. And ushers will be helping you find those seats. As you are moving about the building, and if you bring your kids with you, we would ask you, please keep your kids with you at all times. And so within arm's reach, keep them nearby so that they're not sprinting off and running places where that we don't want them to go during these few days that we're trying to gather like this. And so please keep that in mind as we move in and out of the building. As you come in, we're going to be seating people toward the front, okay? And so think kind of like a wedding. Ushers are trying to move people toward the front. So that the goal of that is to limit as much as we can people passing each other in the aisleways, which are six feet wide. And so hopefully people will get to the front and then we'll load to the back. And so with that, if you are able to get here early, 10 to 15 minutes early, especially if you will not have any kids coming with you, we'd love for you to come early and come move to the front and take those seats up as quickly as possible. And so that will help everyone if you can do that. Also, as you arrive to the building, do not approach the building until you have everybody who's going to be sitting with you. And so if for some reason you came as a family in 2 cars, or you're meeting some friends and y'all have already been doing life together during this time and you plan to sit together, come together and come into the building together, because it's going to be hard to get you 2 seats separately the way we're trying to sit people. So please keep those things in mind. As we dismiss, so I'm going to move past the service, we'll come back to the service. As we dismiss, we're going to dismiss people in sections. And so one of us will come up on the stage and dismiss groups together at different times to try to get people out the building as quickly as possible. So it'll be out those 3 main doors you always come in, and then through the commons, or even out the front doors of the stage. And so if you're sitting in the building to the right or to the left, we have exits that way that we're going to make use of as well. And so you'll just be listening to the staff member who's on the stage telling you when to go. There'll be things that are on the floor of your seats indicating when it's time for you to go. And so if you listen, you'll do just fine. The ushers will help you get out as well. And on top of that, as you move out of the building, especially if you exit out the main doors and through the plaza, we're going to ask you to move toward the parking lot before you start having conversations with people. And so we just want to avoid any sort of bottlenecks. We're trying to get people out of the room as quickly as we can. And so if you can do that for us, just move to the parking lot, especially that sidewalk that's in front of the building. As you're looking at the face of the church building, there's a long sidewalk there. That'd be a great place to have your conversations. In the parking lot could be dangerous for you as cars are driving around. And so that would be the best place for you to have conversations. We don't want to eliminate those conversations. We think that's one of the most important things that we do is we gather. And so we'd love for you to be able to have those, but to have those at the appropriate place, which would be not inside, not in the plaza, and not necessarily in the very middle of the driving areas of the parking lot. So, so that's kind of what you need to know as far as getting in and out. Bart, is there anything I've left out that you think I need to speak to?
Ushers won't be, handing you anything.
So it'll be contactless as you come in. And so ushers will not have worship guides. Those will be all digital. We'll ask you to get that on your phone. Of course, there'll be stuff on the screens, lyrics, things like that. The Lord's Supper, which we'll talk about in a minute, will be different as well, but it's not going to involve you getting up and walking around, touching things. It'll be right there at your seat. And so we'll get to that in just a minute.
Hopefully we'll have that worship guide out as well in the mornings before, so you can have option. If you want to print it, you can do that. Again, you can follow along on your phone. So let's stay on the worship service, Nick. So Nick helps us think a lot about liturgy, does a great job of doing that. So, but what's different, what's the same? What's the thinking? Because I know the elders had a conversation. Obviously, we had a conversation about that. So maybe kind of weave that in, talk about that conversation, how we want to maintain what we do, but at the same time be mindful. There are a lot of kids in the room. And so forth.
And so we do anticipate families bringing their kids. And we don't know how many might do that, but we anticipate it'll certainly be more than 0. And so we're excited about that. But as a staff, as we were having these conversations, initially we were thinking, we're going to try to make this service about 1 hour compared to our usual hour and a half. As we brought that to the elders, it was about unanimous, not against the 3 of us, but a unanimous suggestion toward the 3 of us to say, why would we do such a thing? Why would we take the service down that drastically? And so we, being the 3 staff members, didn't make the decision. The elders made the decision that we need to not necessarily shoot for an hour, but it'll be somewhere between an hour and 15, maybe an hour and 20. So we'll try to cut a few things down just a little bit. So there's some things that will naturally be eliminated, like the mutual greeting where we go around and shake hands with one another. That's not going to happen. As we go, there'll be a couple of things. So we'll probably trim out the moment of silence at the beginning, just because that if there's kids fidgeting around, we know that can be challenging. We'll cut one song out. We'll try to make some of our prayers a little shorter, and so whereas the prayer of confession might normally be 4 to 5 minutes, we'll try to aim for 3. Same for the prayer of intercession at the end. There's going to, like I said, no physical greeting, no physical offering. And the way in which we do communion will look different. And so it's not going to be getting up, going to tables. There's not going to be anyone who's had prepared that communion beforehand, like normally our 3 deaconesses do. But what you're going to see when you come into your seats is you will have what's called a fellowship cup, which is the pre-filled cup with the cracker sealed in it. And so we intend to sit those out underneath every single seat about a week in advance. And so maybe Monday or Tuesday of the week leading into the service, we'll plan to put those out, and they'll just sit in the seats or underneath the seats throughout the week. And so by the time you arrive, there will be a communion cup under your seat. And so just leave it there, and when we come to that point of the service, so right after the sermon, we'll just transition right into the Lord's Supper. And so it won't be getting up, walking around, we're trying to minimize that. It won't be going to a common place where we're all touching the same thing, but you'll have your Lord's Supper, your elements right there. And so as we are in person thinking about the Lord's Supper, obviously things will look different, and things will be drastically different compared to what we're used to. We used to walk to the table and smile at one another because we were glad to see each other going to the Lord's table, fellow brothers and sisters that have been redeemed by Christ. And so as we go now, it will look a little different because we're not going anywhere. We're just staying in our seats. But on top of that, there will be notable absences, people you're used to seeing that you will no longer see, at least for these first initial weeks. And so there is some sadness to that, but even we acknowledge that the sadness of that doesn't remove the calling upon us to take the Lord's Supper and the joy that undergirds the Lord's Supper. And so we are eating and drinking this cup because Jesus Christ died and rose again for our forgiveness and for our eventual resurrection. And so we come to this table with joy mixed with a little bit of sorrow, even as we acknowledge that the whole congregation is not able to gather here. And so, Bart, even on that, I would love to ask you, so as we come to the table, we're thinking about or I guess as the table comes to us, as the table is underneath our chairs, we are being mindful of the death and resurrection of Christ. We're thinking of those things, but we're mindful of the fact that there are brothers and sisters who cannot take the Lord's Supper with us because they're not here. And so obviously they can't take it because they're not here. Bart, what should those brothers and sisters be thinking who are choosing to stay home for good reasons and cannot be here as we partake of the Lord's Supper? Bart, what should we think?
Yeah, so I mean, like Nick said, we're sad in that direction, thinking of those who can't be here, but those who are home. I think about one sister that I was emailing with her, and she is immunocompromised, and she probably will not be here for a while. I don't really know how long she won't be here, and so, but loves our church. And one line in there, it's not an exact quote, but in that she was saying, I probably will not be able to be there because of health conditions, but I rejoice that others can be. And it just strikes me as a real example of rejoicing with those who rejoice. Even as we are weeping with those who weep, as Nick kind of referenced or spoke to, then that sister is really given an opportunity by the Lord. And it's a hard lesson. It's a hard thing to do. But we would encourage you to maybe even take that to heart. How can I rejoice that there are people who are gathered? And then obviously we're all praying for the day when we can be united. And so there are probably different lessons across the body. And then I think, as we learn those lessons, then how might God use that 5, 10, 20 years down the road in all of our sanctification and all of our growth, as the Lord teaches us different things at the same time through the same event. And so, it's going to be hard. And we want to pray and ask the Lord to give us grace, and the Lord to give grace across the board to uphold brothers and sisters in Christ. And so we should probably add, that just because, by the way, that it's setting the Lord's Supper, the elements are sitting beneath your seat, doesn't mean, of course, that you must partake. And so there may be brothers and sisters who feel okay about coming to worship, but then who think, I don't want to touch anything near my mouth at this time. We want to make sure that, again, there's a freedom there, and so we're not looking around in a suspicious way who's taking or not, or in a judgmental way who's partaking or not. We understand that there are different concerns all across the board. I don't know, again, who you're around on Monday, Tuesday, Friday. You know that, and so we acknowledge that. Another thing maybe on the worship service I'll just kind of add, we do plan to move to a different sermon series So the day we gather back, June the 7th, it'll become a one-off sermon. We think there's something, the elders feel united really in speaking to our congregation about unity. And so we're going to preach on Romans 14 on that particular day, Lord willing. But then after that, one of the challenges of preaching in Acts, great book, obviously we love to preach it, and we've enjoyed it, is that the texts are really long. And so I think this week Acts 15 is 41 verses. That's hard to read all of that, preach all of that in a more succinct manner. So we think, again, maybe with more kids in the room, a great opportunity to catechize, to teach. And so we're going to switch over to some much shorter texts, like some of them will be 4 words, thou shalt not kill. So we'll be doing the 10 Commandments, actually, beginning, Lord willing, on June the 14th. And so we're excited about that sermon series. I think it'll be helpful for our congregation, but we think it'll also kind of fit just this particular season that we're in. So, Ryan, really quickly, just on kids. So, what about CFC kids?
As long as social distancing is an encouraged thing by government officials, as long as this room is kind of set that way, we really can't enforce that. We have no really good way of enforcing that in CFC kids, especially with our younger kids, which is our biggest demographic. So currently there's no CFC kids that's planned for now. We're still talking as a reopening team. You can pray for us as a kind of the subcommittee of CFC kids has conversations about what it looks like to come back. And like I said, there will be some helps coming out that we're hoping to get to you that will help you if you do decide to come with your kids, or if you decide to stay home, that will help you disciple your kids at home as well.
One of the most difficult questions that we faced as elders, and I know other pastors and other churches are facing this very same question, is mask or facial coverings. And I want to just kind of let you know, obviously I put that in the document, that we thought about 3 particular choices. 1, should they be required? 2, should it be recommended? Or 3, should it just kind of be personal responsibility? We landed on a kind of a modified second option there of recommending them, but recommending them in 3 particular moments. And so we are, as a church, recommending facial coverings. And so that can obviously look a lot, that's a broader term. And so mask or facial coverings during 3 particular moments. So as we enter, as we exit, and as we sing. And you may be wondering kind of what went into that, why those particular 3 moments. Obviously, it's our understanding, and I'm sure yours as well, that there's no silver bullet in all of this. Just Sunday, this past Sunday, Lev Bragg, one of our elders, who is a doctor and who was also on that reopening team, sent me an article from the New Yorker from a doctor in Boston. Kind of explains their mitigation strategy in hospitals and then, of course, them going to their homes. And he explains it in terms of a cocktail. And now people tell me that a cocktail is a mixed drink, and so I'll use that illustration here. But that's kind of what we're thinking about as we reopen. And he identifies kind of 4 components in that: 1, distancing; 2, communication; 3, cleaning; and 4, coverings. And so just kind of going through those, we are distancing, and we intend to do that rigorously. And so that's why entrance, exit, all those things are particularly important. We are communicating, and so we say, again, if you are sick, don't come, and we want to stay on that message. Number 3, we are cleaning, and so we'll disinfect surfaces. We're going to provide hand sanitizer, encourage hand washing, all those kind of things. No touching, doors will be open, all those kinds of things. And then 4th, we are encouraging facial coverings, especially in places where social distancing will be more difficult, entering and exiting, and where social distancing might be less effective. And so you've probably seen articles about, hey, what about singing in church? And so we do understand and take that advice that singing would be, one of the most, kind of prime time, if you want to say, in our church, and at least in our service, for spread. And so how can we mitigate that? And so we thought it would be best to encourage, at that particular moment, facial coverings. And I was even watching one of the Sunday shows this morning, and Dr. Deborah Burks was on there, and her encouragement was, they were speaking about churches, and they asked her about that. And she said, if you can't social distance, then you need to wear a facial covering. And so we're thinking, where might it be least effective, even as we are socially distanced? Where would it be least effective? Well, we think singing might be the particular moment. And so actually Nick had kind of suggested that to our elders, that might be a way of kind of addressing that particular concern. And so we're asking all members of Christ Fellowship Church, all who attend, to prayerfully consider wearing a facial covering, at least during those 3 particular moments. We'll have them available, and so we've ordered, 1,000 or so, something like that. And so we've taken books out of the bookstall. We did that just a little bit ago. And so our plan is to just put facial covering mask in those particular areas. If you forget one, then you're welcome to come in and just grab one of those before you come into the service. And so would say also that, just full disclosure, this is, I think, even an opportunity for us as elders to grow and to talk, because there's not unanimity on this question as you go from Christian to Christian and beyond Christians. Obviously, our society, this is a particularly contentious debate, and we see it more and more. So we want to make a distinction between uniformity in thinking and unanimity, in being united as a body. And so we're praying that God will unite our hearts, and that's why we want to preach on Romans 14 on June the 7th, and even this week as we preach on Acts 15. We think God has even providentially put those 2 texts before us as a congregation. Think, what is it that truly unites us? The gospel in Acts 15, and then as we look to Romans 14, what do we do when we disagree about things that are not the gospel? And so let the Lord instruct us on that. So very quickly, Ryan, survey?
Yes. This is important. There will be a survey that will come out. We're scheduling it to come out on probably Sunday afternoon. And pretty much every Sunday afternoon for a while. Especially this Sunday, though, asking you if you are planning on coming on June 7th. That way, right now we have 1 service, and that is for a variety of reasons, but we're not opposed to 2 services during these unique times. And so if we get results back that tell us that we're going to have a lot of people here, we need to be able to make adjustments as necessary. So when you'll get an email from us. I think it'll be coming from me on Sunday afternoon, early Monday morning, one of those 2. And if you can fill that out as soon as you can during the week, that would be very helpful for us just as a staff and administratively as we think through all the logistics that go into everything that Nick talked about, distancing and setting up the chairs.
So survey coming. Please fill it out every week that we send it, so you can help us as a congregation. Growth groups, Nick?
Yeah, so wanted to give a little bit of recommendations on growth groups. And so we've talked as elders and been giving a little bit of this information to the growth group leaders. But what should you expect a whole church for growth groups meeting in the near future? And so for now, what we're going to recommend is going to break up kind of what we're used to in our growth groups. So our growth groups have men and women all mixed together of different stages of life. And so what we're going to have to do is to facilitate meeting in person is probably break that up to some degree. And so what we're going to recommend is that men and women in growth groups meet separately on alternating weeks. And so week 1, the men in my group would get together, and then week 2, the women in my growth group would get together, and then vice versa, for weeks ongoing. At the same time, if you're the men in the group and the women are meeting in person, you could, of course, carry on a Zoom growth group meeting. We'd be happy for you to do that during those nights. We would recommend, if at all possible, that those meetings take place outside. And so it's one of the best ways to do the social distancing thing, especially when it comes to being in each other's homes. So if it's possible to meet outside, that's what we would recommend as a church. And so we think it'd be easier. It's hard to get maybe 10 to 15 people in your living room. And so if it's possible, let those meetings take place outside. We also would suggest that for the time being, kids remain at home. And so that's one of the main reasons for the men and women meeting alternating nights, is because if I'm at home and my wife is meeting with the women in growth group, I can watch the kids, and then vice versa. And so not every group has kids. That's one growth group that doesn't have kids, but all other 19 of them have kids. And so we recognize that social distancing with kids is not really a possibility, whether that's here at the church building or in your home. And so that's what we're going to recommend. And then in the same way that we are kind of asking the people to be willing to wear a mask when they come to church, you should be willing to wear a mask when you go to growth group. It may not be necessary. You may be outside, but it could be that there's someone in your group that is coming in close proximity with you that's immunocompromised or living in close quarters with someone who is. We'd ask that you would please be willing to wear a mask, not let that become an issue of division in your growth group. So that's kind of what we're recommending for now. And as things change, hopefully we'll be able to change that in the way we do growth groups.
Well, we'll conclude. I do want to end with a word, not to those who may be coming, because that's where we spent the majority of our time, but to those who are pretty sure they will not be here in the near term. we want you to know as elders that we miss you, and there will be a sense in which we will miss you even more as we begin gathering together, but you can't. And so obviously that breaks our hearts. I'm sure I speak for these brothers and for the rest of our elders that this church is a profound joy and blessing in our lives. And we love sitting in this room and hearing the word together, standing in this room and singing the word together, gathering around the Lord's table and seeing the word together, congregating in this room, preaching the word together, and bowing our hearts together in this room together as we pray the word. And so that's a highlight of our week. That's the centerpiece, really, of our week. That's the way we even intend it to be in terms of our church covenant, the way we organize our lives, our spiritual lives. And we would say it will not be the same without you. And so I want you to hear me clearly. We want you to hear us clearly that as long as we are kept apart, we will pray that God will bring us together again. As long as we are apart, we're going to pray that God will bring us together. And by God's grace and God's help, we do not want to forget anymore. And so we don't want the impression, hey, we're gathering back together again, and well, the dude just kind of lost some people along the way. That is not what a shepherd does. He cares for all of his sheep. And so our ministry will look different, but it must look different. And so that means that we are going to think through some things. It may take some time. We'll take some time. There'll be mistakes along the way. I'm sure there'll be misstarts as we try to figure that out. But our pledge to you is that we will try by God's help. And so we would love for you to pray with us about that and even help us. Like, how can we best care for you? And it's our responsibility to think through that question first and to take that initiative. But there may be ways in which we're missing things, and probably will be. And so we would encourage you to help us and to work with us even as elders. And so I'll conclude because I think Paul's words to the Romans is kind of fitting in terms of those who cannot maybe gather together. It just speaks that longing heart where he says, "For God is my witness," Romans 1:9-12. "For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I mention you, always in my prayers, asking that somehow, by God's will, I may now at last succeed in coming to you," or you coming to us, right? "For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you, that is, that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine." That's our prayer. We love you, church, all 426 of you. Blessings.